Okay, hello everybody. We're going live. I started the live streaming. I hope everyone's doing well. This is the third meeting of the South Frederick Corridor Scoping Group, and like I said, it's being live streamed through publicinput.com. People can connect to that through www.publicinput.com/S6814. And people can listen, leave a voice message, or enter a queue to provide live comment. And also, people can access this meeting through the county website, the project page, which is www.frederickcountymd.gov/8141. And as per usual, we will be, prior to the end of the meeting, we'll be stopping to take public comment. Also, just kind of as a reminder, we're all aware that the WebEx sound is a little wonky, so please try to keep yourself muted unless you want to say something. And also, don't worry about kind of raising your hand or being specifically acknowledged. Just kind of jump right in anytime you have something to say. So today on the agenda that I sent out, we have 3 items. And the first is a presentation of case studies. The second is a discussion of goals. And the third is a discussion of the draft vision statement. But I'd actually like to make a few revisions to this. One kind of more minor one and one slightly more significant. First of all, I think it makes sense to put the vision discussion before the goals discussion, because the vision is really kind of the context for the goals. And secondly, for a similar reason, I'd like to hold off on getting into specific case studies at this point in time, because I want to try to focus a little more on some of the larger scale planning and design issues. And specifically, I think it's important to dig in a bit to some of the residential and employment analysis that was included in the briefing book. And also, I wanted to make sure to give enough attention to kind of these issues of large scale design before we get into issues of small scale design. So unless there's any objection, I'd like to kind of propose that revision. And I hope there's no objection, because I really don't have anything prepared for case study at this point in time. But is there any kind of significant objection to that change to the agenda? Okay. I will say, though, that we are preparing information for case studies. We've reached out to some people in other jurisdictions that have worked on similar plans, and I haven't gotten a response yet, but I hope to be able to bring someone in to talk to us about their process. Namely, we're going to look at the parole development in Anne Arundel County outside of Annapolis, which has a pretty long history, and they're actually looking at revising their plan after a period of time. So it could be an interesting presentation. And also another project we kind of targeted is the Mosaic District in the Merrifield area of Fairfax County, which isn't kind of an exact match in terms of fundamentals. There are certain infrastructure differences, but it's still something that I think could be very instructive. So with that, unless anyone has any questions or comments, I'm going to go into a presentation to kind of kick off some of that other kind of broader scale issues I wanted to dig into a little bit more. So any comments or feedback at this point? Okay. So let me start this presentation. All right, so some of the reasons why I wanted to step back a bit before we get into these specific case studies is because the planning area is really quite large. And, you've all seen these graphics in the briefing book. So, the planning area can contain most of downtown Frederick and major swaths of Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. And so often when the question of kind of case studies or precedents comes up, I personally really struggle with trying to come up with a significant or a single example. And it's largely, I think, because of this fact that, this area is very big. And, so that kind of means that no single approach, I think, is really kind of the answer. And there can be a lot of different things happening. And in order to kind of maintain the focus a bit on how we get to creating a common vision for this area, I think it's important to review some of the demands we'll be facing in terms of housing and jobs over the long term, which is an analysis that's included in your briefing books, but I think bears a bit of a further discussion, especially because this is a key area for meeting some of the demands, and it's kind of notable to be met through physical design. So with that said, I'd like to start by reviewing two kinds of global assessments that were provided in the briefing book, one for housing and one for jobs. So these analyses are here to provide a context for the need to focus on this area as a place to absorb growth in housing and in jobs. This housing analysis is shown here, and it represents an analysis of projected residential growth relative to pipeline dwellings and dwellings that could be developed through land that is designated in our comprehensive plan. So many of you probably already know this, but pipeline dwellings are development that has some kind of development approval, be it a rezoning or subdivision or site plan, but are not yet constructed. And land that is designated in the comp plan has a designation that indicates that it's planned for future residential growth, but may not have kind of specific zoning or any other kind of development approval. So they're sort of more potential dwellings. So this analysis then kind of allocates that growth relative to two different kinds of place types, which for us is actually a much more detailed look at our growth than we've kind of done before. Traditionally, our analysis of residential growth couldn't really do much to assess the place type preferences of growth, like in terms of the physical environment or like the style of development. But since we were able to develop kind of a substantive and detailed hypothesis about our forecast growth due to the work that we did with our consultant, Renaissance Planning, we were able to develop an understanding of the types of physical places that this projected growth would likely prefer. And then we could design the livable Frederick master plan to fulfill those preferences, and partly that design involves doing plans like the South Frederick corridors. And these preferences could really be simplified to their core as households that would likely prefer suburban style development versus households that would likely prefer styles of development that could support multimodal accessibility, which are the kind of sort of compact, mixed use, walkable, bikeable, transit serviceable places that we planners often promote. But in this case, this style of development is substantiated by this market-based assessment, not only by the typical logical planning arguments that are related to sort of conservation, efficiency, and place, but also by this market-based assessment. And the results of this analysis is that of the 45,000 projected households to come to Frederick County through 2050, between 2015 and 2050, 19,000 of them would have a preference for suburban environments, and 26,000 of them would have a preference for environments that support multimodal accessibility. So to kind of see how this would work out relative to the pipeline and undeveloped land that is already designated for residential development in the comp plan, we split those pipeline and potential dwellings between suburban locations and multimodal locations. And this was based on whether they're located central to an existing municipality or developed portion of the county, which would be a multimodal location, or whether they're located in the outskirts of kind of growth areas and municipalities and developed portions of the county, which would be a suburban location. And this kind of showed that because the pipeline and designated land can potentially supply a significant share of suburban type development, that the majority of our surplus demand is for places that support multimodal accessibility. And then to kind of shed some light on this seemingly like diaphanous analysis, it's worth it really to take a look at the process that our consultant, Renaissance Planning, used to develop this growth forecast that this kind of analysis is based on. So with Renaissance Planning, their analysis was jobs based. So they started with a jobs projection from Woods and Poole, which is a private firm that does jobs forecasting. So this data was compiled by industry, and it's available for every county in the US. And it included current estimates for 2015, as well as projections of growth through 2050. Then, in order for some conclusions about the place type preferences of future growth to be kind of formed, they used a data set called the Esri Tapestry. And this data set breaks down households into different market groups. And that's kind of also organized by county and available for the entire US. And this information includes the type of physical environment that each market group tends to live in. So we can kind of connect market groups to physical place. But the thing about the tapestry is it's not a forecast. It doesn't forecast anything out into the future. It just really provides a current assessment. So in order to create a forecast of these different kind of market groups using the tapestry data, the consultant looked county by county and correlated the number of jobs in every category of the jobs data with the number of households in a particular market segment. So basically, they developed a statistical regression model to find kind of a correlation between this independent variable, which is the number of jobs, and the dependent variable, which is the number of households. And they did this for every county in the US and used only data where there was a high statistical confidence that the independent variable played a strong role in determining the dependent variable. And so from this, they developed these average values for the rate of occurrence of households in different market groups relative to the number of jobs in a particular industry. So in other words, as a hypothetical example, this means that if the rate of science and technology jobs for every one boomer market group household is 0.6, then you'd have kind of 0.6 science and technology jobs for every boomer household. So with these rates, they could estimate the future mix of market groups based on the forecast they had for the future mix of jobs. So they take the future jobs projection, factor each industry by the rate for each market group, and then developed a result that forecast the composition of market groups in the county in 2050. And that really went a long way in supporting our conclusion that we would have a significant share of people in the county over the next couple of decades that would prefer a place that was characterized by multimodal accessibility. So really, this analysis wasn't just about kind of being logical about how and where we should build. It wasn't kind of only a normative analysis. It was also a very empirical analysis, and it was based on sort of the preferences of people in different market groups. So kind of moving on to the jobs side, a separate analysis of jobs in the county is also included in the briefing book. And this analysis is also not a forecast or a projection. Rather, it's kind of a retrospective look at the concentration of jobs in the county relative to the growth of those jobs for the years between 2006 and 2001 and 2016. Now, the Livable Frederick Master Plan effort included some information along these lines in the form of a forecast, which I explained earlier was kind of the basis for the residential projection. However, since the Frederick County Office of Economic Development had worked with a consultant to develop an economic development strategy for the county, and in the interest of kind of aligning strategy across different agencies and breaking down governmental silos, we borrowed the analysis from the OED document, which actually and thankfully aligns really well with the analysis done by Renaissance Planning. And what this does is calculate how concentrated the number of jobs for a particular industry is in the region relative to the concentration of jobs for that industry nationally, which they come up with a number called the location quotient. So if an area has a high location quotient, then that means that the number of jobs in that area is higher than the national average. Then the analysis compares this with the local historic growth rate of those jobs. So in other words, if an industry has a high concentration of jobs relative to the rest of the nation, and also a historic high growth rate, then those jobs are likely a good bet for continued strong growth and continued concentration based on that past performance. And these all fell into what they called the stars quadrant of the graph. Then if an industry has a high concentration of jobs but has a low growth rate, then that industry might have limited growth potential but provide significant regional employment, and hence are kind of primary retention targets. And these fall into the transitional quadrant of the graph. If an industry has a low concentration of jobs but a high growth rate, then through industry and economic development growth strategies, then these industries could potentially expand. And these fall into this emerging potential quadrant of the graph. And then finally, if an industry has a low concentration and a low growth rate, then these industries have limited prospects for future growth, and these fall into the divergent quadrant of the graph. So the conclusions of this analysis are that sci-tech jobs and bioscience jobs are kind of the bread and butter of the future. And there's potential to develop computing jobs and value-added agricultural jobs, and to some extent, kind of hospitality and transportation jobs. And the kind of net result of both of these analyses is one thing that justifies planning for the South Frederick corridors, because a significant amount of that demand for jobs, especially science and tech and bioscience, and even computing and IT jobs, can potentially be satisfied to a greater extent in this area, and similarly for housing.
John, so for this particular chart, seeing this growth in the biosciences and professional, are these just like organic growth just happened and there wasn't really any previous planning or planning effort to encourage this industry growth here, and that we're just taking a snapshot now, and now we have to go ahead and decide whether we want to continue or to actually be aspirational in terms of growing these areas? I'm just trying to understand where you want to go with this data moving forward versus this historical perspective and how it weighed into what we see today.
Yeah, I believe this analysis is, a bit retrospective, but it also is intended to imply that, these past conditions will continue into the near future. So it allows economic development to kind of target a variety of industries that have a lot of potential for growth. I don't think that we are necessarily, limited by the results of this analysis. I think one of the things that we can do is consider these results, and also consider alternatives and how those might influence the outcomes. All projections, all analyses are at their base guesses. Some of them are very kind of scientific guesses, but the fact that nobody knows what the future holds is, something that we're not going to surmount. And so while we're doing a lot of these forecasts, we need to kind of take them with a bit of a grain of salt that, there's no absolute guarantee that what they tell us, it will be the outcome. But they're good guesses.
Hey, John.
Nonetheless, it gives you some insight as to where we could provide incentive programs in the future, or if we feel like we want to develop these areas, then the plan could include those particular aspects of it.
Yes, that's right.
Hey, John, this is Carl. I had brought this up during one of our first meetings. I did look at this chart, and I found it, pretty much spot on, except for, these last 7-8 months. I think the market has changed.
Yes.
And I think, just personally knowing the market, what's happening out in the market, that the transportation, distribution, and logistics should probably get, or we should add more weight to that sector, just because of the last 7-8 months.
That's an excellent point. That's a very insightful point.
And that will be kind of somewhat lopsided because it's been lumpy. So transportation, distribution, logistics for biosciences are doing quite well, but that's not the case for other things. So it's going to be challenging to parse that one out.
Right. No, that's great. Thank you for those comments. It makes a lot of sense. Anything else before I move on? So the briefing book also kind of gets into some brief discussion about the type of physical place that should be realized in the future through kind of this continued development of the South Frederick corridors. And for example, for a long time, the South Frederick corridors was really tied to this identifiable physical feature, which was located at the intersection of what would become Maryland 85 and Maryland 355. So this is an aerial photograph from 1952, and it shows the intersection of these two roads with what became Maryland 85 kind of intersecting here. Here's what became 85 intersecting into kind of Maryland 355 here. And so at this intersection, there was kind of a thick line of evergreen trees planted, which you can kind of see by this more darkened area in the aerial. And these trees were likely there to kind of help screen the locust level estate, which there's a rendering of which shown here on this inset. And this estate kind of fronted this intersection and these two roads. And this image actually shows the estate without any of the evergreens, but we have found kind of narrative histories that have described the planting of the evergreens at this location. Actually, also as kind of an interesting aside, this is called the locust level estate, and a lot of the reason for that is the front porch of the house was planted with this level line of locust trees. So thus the name locust level came about, which you can see here in this rendering. But in any case, these evergreen trees soon became really the dominant characteristic at this intersection. And this intersection met at this kind of oblique angle forming a point. And that's, very likely how the name Evergreen Point came about. Like you can see the surroundings is primarily farmland, with the exception of this estate compound, which has a higher density of development. And that means that this is, because of that distinction from its surroundings, it's really kind of a landmark feature. It was very noticeable and very different than anything around it. So now there's this scientific study conducted by Kevin Lynch at MIT, published in 1960, and it was popularized in a book called The Image of the City, which some of you may know about. And in this study, we were trying to find they were they were trying to find out how people kind of cognitively process their physical environment. And what they found is that some places make this easy and others make it difficult. And the places that make it easy have a certain persistent set of physical features, which they defined as landmarks, edges, pathways, districts, and nodes. And the conclusion from this study is that kind of if environments have these features clearly defined and arranged in a logical structure, then they are more likely to result in environments that are more functional, usable, and easier to kind of cognitively process by forming what they call mental maps. And, you know, I think it can be argued that Evergreen Point was really one of these kinds of distinct features. I think that it kind of helped create a vivid mental image that people associated in their mind's eye with this physical place. You know, people referred to it as Evergreen Point. And, you know, for a long time, an actual place that was thought of as Evergreen Point was this kind of simple, clear part of this picture. It was this distinct landmark. But then as the corridors developed, this kind of simple clarity was lost. And the environment grew into the kind of place that, if taken as a whole, doesn't really have many of these sort of important elements. It's rather kind of sort of haphazard. It feels at least haphazard. And there's a lot of kind of dispersed, large parking areas, large format buildings. So it doesn't have a lot of those kind of features that kind of help you cognitively come up with an understanding of a place in your mind's eye. But now, if we consider places like downtown Frederick City, which, you know, has that vivid clarity in its own kind of physical form and configuration, you know, this is really kind of the same kind of clarity that the evergreens at the intersection of 85 and 355 once provided in terms of type. And so I think it's conceivable that if we plan boldly and with shared vision, we can kind of try to regain like a new version of this quality through gradual redevelopment in the South Frederick corridors. And along these lines, the briefing book provides some information about potential design strategies related to Route 85 and Route 355. Namely, there's this notion of thinking of these as thematic corridors. For example, 355 connects several historic and cultural features, such as the battlefield in downtown Frederick and Mount Olivet Cemetery, the Thomas Johnson Manor House. So, you know, I don't think it's a stretch to think of it as a kind of a historic corridor. And 85 connects a significant number of employment centers in the county, you know, including a significant amount of industrial land to the south, the FSK Mall and industrial parks, Industry Lane Business Center, East Street, all the way up to Riverside Tech Park, the airport, and so on. And, you know, these thematic approaches can really influence specific design decisions as we move forward. Now, finally, the last thing from the briefing book I kind of wanted to share, and to kind of be in support of this to kind of be in support of this notion of reimagining the area. The briefing book, you know, kind of has this, tries to include this point about change and the notion that in this case, it kind of makes sense to think big because we don't really have to do everything tomorrow. So we kind of provided this focused look at the development of the area over the last few decades, which really shows how much has occurred, but it's occurred incrementally over time. So the message here is that we don't need to kind of be afraid of big ideas and big vision, because this doesn't really need to have to happen tomorrow. But it's really the most important part is that we have a vision so that as we adapt and respond to current demands, that we can do that while sort of maintaining our progress towards kind of a clear end goal. So that's the presentation I wanted to share with you guys. At the next meeting, I'm planning on looking into case studies, and at some point we'll start looking at different design approaches for the planning area. But that concludes my presentation. Now, before we get into discussion of the vision, I want to open it up at this point for any questions or comments regarding the presentation.
Hey, John, this is Carl. I think the graphic that you had up on the screen from the briefing book is really telling. And specifically what I focused on, I drove around, just trying to get a feel for what's existing, what changes could occur. And I think if you go back to that last graphic and you show, I think it's page 20 of the briefing book, and you show the two different quarries that are currently existing and how they have grown over time and how that would impact the vision moving forward as far as what development occurs in and around the quarries. So I think it's important to know, because frankly, I know somebody there, and I was going to reach out to them just to try to understand, what is the long-term benefit of the quarry? Is it another 20 years? Is it 50 years? Is it 100 years? I don't know. But I think we ought to know that as we go through this vision process, especially the quarry up there by 70. If that's,
right.
if that's an active quarry that's going to be there for the next 100 years, we should know that.
Yeah, and we have met with them over time in the past, off and on, and each one of those meetings, they've communicated that they do have long-term plans for continuing operations at that particular quarry. The Southern Quarry, my understanding is decommissioned, and they do mainly materials processing on the site. Although I need to verify that, so take that with a grain of salt. But what happens with the quarry? Future conditions can change. The viability of the quarry might change relative to the development happening around it, as well as us sort of thinking about what their long-term goals are. So either way, your point is very well taken. We need we have reached out to them, and we are going to continue to do so to help kind of understand what their goals are. Dennis, do you have anything you want to contribute, or anyone else?
Just that we had reached out back in April or May, and so we do have a contact for the area manager who kind of manages all of their Maryland operations, or maybe most of their Maryland operations. So we do have that contact, and they understand that we're doing this plan, and they are kind of on standby waiting for us to engage them further.
I don't.
Go for it, Kelly.
Rick, go ahead.
So I have a simple ask, John, because I'm a little bit concerned about the image of Baker Park and the reference to place that brings up in our minds, as opposed to a built environment that we're talking about planning for the next 20, 25 years. It might help us all because one is organic, the other will be created. Urban Land Institute, other technical resources that you guys have access to might be useful on a future call for us to talk about the difference between an organic environment that we all value versus how you overlay that kind of thinking on a long-term planning effort. So, and I have some resources I'm going to email you that might help with that. But it's a pretty complicated conversation, and I think it's one that deserves a little bit of extra enlightenment, a little more input. So that's just something I think we ought to factor into the sensitivity as we move forward.
Good point. Thank you for that.
John,
Yeah.
I wanted to go back to the quarry issue just briefly. I'm getting a little bit of feedback. I'm not sure if there are people that need to go on mute. Recently, here in the city of Frederick, we have been dealing with some property losses as a result of the dewatering zones of influence around the quarry. We lost a house into a sinkhole, and then one had to be raised because it was so damaged. And so there are these areas around the quarries that can be, I think they really need to be considered in terms of whether or not you put more development near them. And I know in one of your plans, you have a quick mention of that. But
Yeah.
I think it's really important to consider not only the viability of the quarries, but the quarrying does have an effect on the karst topography that we have and the stability of the ground.
Yeah, the zone of dewatering influence, it's not just an issue of blasting, it's also the issue of the stability of the ground and the surroundings. So yeah, that's absolutely a good point. Great points. Thank you. Anything else, guys, before we get into the vision? With the vision, I wasn't sure if you guys wanted to like have someone, me maybe, read through it all, or if we wanted to just kind of dig into it if people had specific items. I mean, I'm happy to kind of read through it. It's not a very short vision. I don't want to bore you guys, but I'm not sure how you guys want to approach it. If you want to take a little time to kind of review it, just to gather your thoughts, or what do you think? Would you like me to kind of read the vision?
John, I think it's lengthy to read and sort of be able to follow it, but to that point, there's a lot there. So I'm just wondering if we could maybe hone the vision down to a single page or half a page. It's a lot.
Yeah. One of the things we found with Livable Frederick, oftentimes visions that I've seen before were maybe a paragraph or two, and they didn't really convey a lot of what the intended outcomes were. And one of the things that I think we benefited a lot from the master plan was the level to which we were able to break down the vision into kind of pieces, or at least subcategories. So it really helped us be able to connect our goals and our initiatives to specific aspects of the vision. So initially, I was a little bit hesitant to support the idea of having a very detailed vision, but it actually worked out pretty well, I thought, for the Livable Frederick Master Plan. And I'm not necessarily saying we need to have quite the amount of vision statements that we had in the Livable Frederick Plan, but I kind of feel like a bit of a longer vision actually helps us get at some points that we wouldn't be able to get at with a shorter version. At least that's my feeling about it.
Hey, I think that there's a lot of really valuable information in here, but when I think of a vision statement, I think of just that, more of a statement, supported by context and additional information. I'm also wondering if you put headphones on, if we could eliminate the feedback, because I'm hearing me talking now.
If I put headphones on?
Yeah, because when one of us speaks and participates, what we're hearing on our end is our voice coming out of your speaker.
Oh, bear with me. I'll try that.
And if everybody that is not speaking would please mute while the others are.
Can anybody hear me?
We can hear you fine. And there's
Okay.
no feedback. Nice teamwork.
And I look,
But-
more, I don't know, technical. I don't know. I look
You
more
look super
action oriented.
But again, the vision is really good and it has a lot of important components. I guess my question for you is, do you want it to fully describe everything, or do you want to put sort of an action or a call to action at the beginning and then support it with additional content?
Yeah, that's definitely an approach we can take. We could break it down into levels in the same way that we did, with the Livable Frederick Master Plan, kind of have this overarching statement and then kind of a more detailed breakdown of that. I like that idea.
Yeah, this is Faith. I just want to say I think I support or lean toward that direction because there are some things that I thought might need to be mentioned. As much as you wrote, I thought there might be some additional things. But if we have a shorter statement and then kind of list out areas, it makes it easier maybe to be a little more inclusive or speak to some more topics.
That's a good point. Did I cut someone off? No.
I like that idea as well. And I also think it presents an opportunity to sort of bold, like instead of all the text being the same, if you just bold it, let's face it, many people are busy trying to suck in a million things at the same time. So a few hints to the reader, like this is the big stuff. And then it's like, oh, I found it. I really care about topic X. I'll read the rest of the paragraph around that might help. Because the goal here is not just to have the vision, but to have people clearly understand it and read it and know it. So just the big bits bolded might help communicate it. And then for those of us who skim, we still get the main points.
Yeah, absolutely. Like the way that it's presented graphically can help communicate it. And emphasizing those key words is a really good approach.
So I'm agreeing with Karen. I think a number of other people that having specific ideas or specific functions bolded for people to follow up on, I think it's a good idea. But at the same time, this is a very complex corridor we're working on, and there's a lot to it. I mean, a lot of stuff, and I don't want to simplify it too much. And I guess my question is this vision statement something for the public, or is this a working document for us as this scoping group?
Right now, it's a working document for you as a scoping group. Eventually, it will be, a part of the public document for feedback. But yeah, so it's for you guys. Okay, well, that's a beginning working document for us. I think it's kind of a good guiding pathway for us. To continue working on, but definitely by the time we develop something that's going out to the public, it probably needs to be condensed somewhat and made a little more graphically appeasing. But I can't hardly disagree with anything that's in here. I like pretty much everything that's in here. And the goals I developed, did focus on specific areas or specific concentrations. That I have particular interest in. But in general, this covers a lot of stuff, and I'm very happy with it in general and the things you're covering. One additional step I want to take, as well as kind of breaking it down into different levels and emphasizing, important aspects of it graphically, is to connect it to the Livable Frederick Master Plan, in the effort to kind of avoid repetition or be more kind of concise and make sure there are kind of connections thematically and topically between those two documents. So that's something I haven't done yet, but I think it's an important step.
Beyond the overall kind of graphics or whatever, on the part where you talk about business, I appreciate the effort to be generic, but I also think the conversation earlier today reminded me of kind of some of those real strong growth industries. And I see a value in clearly expressing, especially, I know bioscience is one that others on this group have mentioned, but some of those key industries that we see that this is an industry that we expect to see strong growth in, and a physical area that would be supportive of that type of growth. I do think that there's a benefit to calling them out, because business is so generic, but identifying a corridor as a collection of like uses and what happens in that industry when they're located together, and the synergy they get from locating in a general sense, co-locating, is really powerful. And I think that there is value in expressing that as a part of the vision statement as well. Not to say that we're excluding businesses, but there's an emphasis or an opportunity for particular ones.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Thank you. I actually haven't read this in a while, but is there a discussion of the importance of health relative to physical design? I'm just wondering if that is an aspect that needs to be included here in some way. Health is a very important part of the Livable Frederick Master Plan. It's one of our 4 pillars, and I just want to make sure that that's included in this piece of the plan.
A word search does not reveal the word health.
Yeah,
so there you go.
The only thing that comes close to it, the environmental aspect of it.
Yeah. So yeah, that's, I think, a gaping hole that probably needs to be inserted in some way.
We also talk about mobility without a car, which is a way to get towards health, but it doesn't make that link.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of my goal statement, I actually refer to it as active mobility or smart mobility, to kind of capture that understanding that it could be buses, it could be bike, it could be walking, some way to go ahead and provide that concept of that it doesn't have to be by car, that there are other options as well.
Going back to the beginning of your presentation, when you talked about the market study and the job growth and housing, and it was housing, you were talking about the 2 different models, suburban as a choice or the multimodal accessibility as a choice. And it struck me that just because you live in a suburban area, you should not be denied multimodal opportunities. So that just seemed like sort of a weird dividing line to me. I'm digressing, but it kind of...
No, yeah. The thing about that is multimodal accessibility requires a certain kind of land use for it to be able to function. And there is a demand out there based on that analysis for people who don't want to live in that kind of environment. They want to live in sort of a suburban neighborhood that's car-based, where they have to drive to the grocery store. There's still a demand for that, and we wanted to try to acknowledge that with our projection. The multimodal accessibility requires, origins and destinations to be much more compressed, to have like a variety of different origins and destinations. So it's a kind of a typologically different type of environment than a suburban environment. So while you can certainly have multimodal options in a suburban place, like bus access or walking or biking, it becomes more difficult because of the distance between origins and destinations. So it's not like as well suited to support multimodal accessibility in a suburban setting as it would be if you were to actually create the land use patterns that make multimodal accessibility much more viable. That makes sense?
No, that makes sense, but I think it's important to remember that our suburban neighborhoods can be connected. I mean, they're not going to be transit hubs, we know that, but there are ways to connect them. Right.
Yes, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I think going on that theme, it didn't speak to connection to the rest of the county. And I thought that was important. You know, this shouldn't just be seen isolated, but especially with regard to transportation, there should be indication of a future direction on connection within the county.
Could you expand on that a little bit? I'm not sure.
Well, I mean, I think that if we're looking to, create more connection within this corridor, such that, you're looking at possible public transit or, combination of pedestrian and public transit, how is that public transit connecting to other parts of the county? I mean, we're going to be expanding it. What's the vision? To me, an indication of that direction. Are we going to make those kinds of investments or look to that in the future? Because there are other corridors, some, developing further that also may have trying a quest for walkable communities. And if so, how do we connect those?
Right.
Because the default would be cars. And if we're trying and limit that, right?
I think one of the things that's really challenging about that particular perspective is that seeing where transportation is going and that we're already now seeing cities with autonomous cars and everything, that can become another connection source. So for people who are in suburban neighborhood, they can just pull up the app and say, pick me up. And that can be an answer to that particular mobility question as far as suburban is concerned, but yet they'll connect them to these urban centers.
Right, or zip cars or, those kinds of, models, whatever the future models are going to be. But yeah, they're definitely evolving in that direction.
Right, like the South Frederick Corridors is not a kind of self-contained entity. It relies on connections to the region, connections to other points in the county, and that needs to be kind of considered as we move forward.
John, it's Denise Spartan at Frederick Health. I was wondering if I could share a model around health, because I don't mean to come back to the topic, but I think we're having a conversation around the very issue of what constitutes community health. If I'm able to share something, I'll try to show you a model from Robert Wood Johnson Foundation that I think will help tie all of this conversation together. Are you able to see that?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. So this is actually, you may be familiar with the county health rankings. This is done across the United States, but this model was done by Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, talking about what are the factors that actually drive the health outcomes of a community. And it may or may not come as a surprise to you about how this model breaks down. But if you look at healthcare itself comprises about maybe 20%. Clinical care is about 20% of the healthy status of a community. But it's these other factors that contribute to overall health outcomes, which is measured both by length of life and quality of life. So you can see some of the things we've talked about: housing, transit, air, water qualities, that physical environment's 10%. A lot of that's influenced, of course, by policies and programs at the governmental level. Then there's social economic factors such as education, employment, social support, communities are really 40% of what constitutes a healthy community. And then finally, it's, individual behaviors that sometimes can be influenced by institutional organizations, such as having a tobacco-free workplace or having access to healthy food around, diet and exercise. So to me, this is the construct. Although the Livable Frederick Plan talks about health outcomes, it really talks about the data that tells you about mortality and morbidity. But it does talk a little bit about social determinants, which is what this model really emphasizes. Those social determinants are around those social economic factors and physical environment. But to me, this is the construct you want to use as thinking about health or improving health or well-being, as we like to call it, because you can't always affect health, but you can affect well-being, since that's an individual's perception of their condition.
Yeah, and I'd like to just underscore the community safety, because that was another thing I was going to raise in terms of the vision, is some kind of statements around community safety.
Great. Well, I'll stop sharing. I'll be happy to email you this model.
Hold on. Yeah, this is great. This is excellent. Don't stop for a second. I think it's interesting to point out, though, that the physical environment plays a significant role, I think, in a number of these factors. The ability to kind of integrate exercise into your daily life is connected with the design of neighborhoods and how close certain destinations are and points of access to transportation. Community safety has a very significant design component. The crime. I can't remember the word for it, but there are certain defensible space. So there's a kind of a design element of that. Access to care, there's a physical design configuration to that. So it's all really interwoven. This is excellent, though. Thank you.
Sure, I'll be happy to email you the model.
Please do.
Could it be sent to all of us?
I don't know how to send it to all of you, but I'll send it to John.
Right. No, I'm asking John if you could.
Yeah, I'll send it to everybody.
Great, thanks.
All right. So I felt like that was interesting and productive, and I feel like we have some good direction, some good approaches for how to take this vision statement to the next step. And I think now's maybe a good time to get into the sharing portion of our meeting, where people asked you guys to maybe think of a few goals that you think would be relevant to this area, and I'm hoping that people are willing to kind of share those with the group. I could go through and ask, one by one, or if people want to just kind of jump in as they feel comfortable.
Hey, John,
Sure.
Was I just wondering say about existing industrial uses? I was from my experience in working on the East Street plan, there was a lot of time we spent talking about who is there today and who we wanted to continue into the future and all of that. And I just wonder, does there need to be any, I know you talk about farms, woodlands, wetlands, meadows, but beyond that, the industrial uses, is there any need to discuss that in the vision statement?
My answer would be absolutely yes. Especially in the sense that I think a lot of the industrial uses in the South probably have a much longer time frame relative to thinking about redevelopment than the uses in the north of the site. So that could be one kind of consideration, but also the transition of some of these uses even in the north. How do we think about that, and what kind of statements do we want to make in the vision statement relative to that? So I think that's another excellent point. Thank you.
All right, I'm willing to go ahead and take some arrows now that we've been through all this conversation. And I put together 3 different goal statements, and I looked at it from 3 different perspectives. One was just kind of like taking in design practices and how do we best apply it in a way that gets us to the vision that we're looking for. The second one is really looking at what may be some concerns that people have about how we're building, and that are we giving adequate attention to our agricultural resources and rural resources, and just trying to kind of highlight that. And then the third one was really kind of more like towards businesses who might want to consider moving into area, what would make this particular corridor attractive as a place to go ahead and want to set up business, because there are some infrastructures or things in place that would make it a good place to work. And so these are just 3 different angles at it. I didn't want to combine them into one goal statement because I felt it would be just too big. But this is my just throwing out there. I did my throwing my dart out on the dartboard and let people take a crack at it.
That's great. Thank you for doing that.
I went about it in a little bit of a different way, and I didn't write any statements, but I did kind of look at some other plan goals just to see what jumped out to me as being things that we want to make sure that we're looking at. So I'll just quickly, I didn't type them up or anything, I'll just quickly read through them. Eliminate disparities so that all communities thrive equally or equitably. Have more jobs that pay living wages, provide affordable and accessible housing, a high quality physical environment, have creative, cultural, and natural amenities, be accessible and have accessible and connected green spaces, complete neighborhoods that are connected, and clear neighborhood identities, climate change resilience, an equitable civic participation system, and a healthy, safe, and connected people. These were just some things that jumped out as me as I was looking through some different communities. And I'm sure there are more. I can write those down and send them to you.
That'd be great. Yeah. One
that.
of the things is like at the beginning, I think these goals are going to be very broad, but I'm hoping we're going to be able to narrow them down as, you know, the plan develops a little bit further. But, you know, this is where we need to start. So, I mean, these are great.
So Kelly, I sort of built off of that, and I was looking at this more as, and Mark, I think you alluded to it, this is sort of, the purpose of these was to help guide this committee. And so when I was thinking about it, I came up with develop a vision that is inclusive of people, places, and practices that drive inclusivity, diversity, and balanced socioeconomic wellness. And that socioeconomic wellness was really a nod to health and well-being. And then, Kara, to your point, I think it was important for us also to continue to partner with established businesses and communities to incorporate all perspectives so a shared vision inclusive of all parties may be created.
Yeah. I took an even different approach. For me, I can't get to a goal, to articulate a goal, if I don't think about metrics. You know, what really, what are we trying to land on? So I thought of some of the questions in my mind to be answered, perhaps, and would be, what is the net new business growth target? You know, what as you see businesses leave, you see growth. What is that net effect really looking like? Because you need to look at both trends, right? There's going to be businesses leaving as well as businesses entering. I also thought about, what is our resident longevity measure? Are we building something where we want to keep people for most of their life, or are we building something that's very transient, you know? I think having a sense of that, and maybe there are areas where it's okay, and other areas where we'd really like to see families come and flourish and stay. So, and then similarly, I was looking at a goal that says, what is the level of accessibility to childcare, to commitment to educational resources, and also, you know, to affordable housing? Because I think, you know, to just, you know, again, some of these things are interconnected. If you want a family to stay, then the educational resources need to be accessible and nearby, as well as even childcare and things of that nature. So, you know, to me, until we kind of landed on a metric, it was hard to say what the goal would be in terms of verbiage.
I'm really glad you said that. You know, I was kind of like stumbling about, you know, how do we kind of get more specific, but really what that is about is metrics. And so finding out how to connect these important broad statements to things that you can actually measure and measure within the study area, I think is key to a part of what we're trying to do here. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
So I did develop 3 goals, and some are very similar to what's already been stated, but I wanted to focus on one in particular, and I have a very specific idea that I want to toss out there for this. So in general, the plan should provide opportunities for a wide range of housing options integrated within or in close proximity to commercial areas, including options that offer affordability for the general workforce, such as those who work at the businesses within the corridor. And then my more specific idea is that incentives for affordable housing could be provided through an affordable housing overlay zone that could be applied to select areas within the corridor. So the affordable housing overlay zone is a very specific and probably somewhat new zone idea for Frederick County that I've been exploring for a while, and I think could very well be adapted to different parts of the corridor here to make sure we provide incentives that developers can use to provide affordable housing. Because as this develops over the decades, there's no assurance that the housing that's being developed will be affordable, and much of it doesn't need to be. Much of it can be high end actually, but just so we have something in place that somewhat guarantees some affordable housing for the workforce in the area, I think is kind of crucial.
Cool idea. You've piqued my interest.
Well, good, because I'm going to talk to you more about it on Friday at our meeting.
Okay. Mark and I are also working on the MPDU, the county MPDU review committee.
I would agree that I think housing is an important goal statement. I didn't really come up with specific, but in my mind, and it's kind of like what Faith was alluding to before, it's sort of the metric around, we need housing at a variety of different income levels and hitting the goals for ensuring that we're serving folks who both want or need an affordable unit. Those are at different levels. And I think it's important, that mix I think is so important to the overall long-term health of the community, and it reflects somebody's life. Talking about if it's for somebody for a moment in their life or the whole lifespan, that mix of price points and different types enables a community to serve you for your entire, not at all. So in my mind, I'm always thinking in that long-term sense. I'd like to have the starter unit in the middle of my life unit, and then the smaller unit that I go back to after everybody's left, all in one place, so I can still be a part of that same community. That's my personal goal. So I don't know what that is in terms of a housing goal exactly, but that's what I was thinking about. And going back to the vision conversation, we were talking about connectivity. And I'm sorry, John, I didn't write these things. They're just concepts in my mind. But to me, connections to downtown Frederick are really important. These are two urban places. Depending on what pathway you take, if you go down Market Street, we obviously have something in between that's not very urban. If we have the Brickworks property, and that should maybe that's going to be another mosaic district. We'll see. So there's the pathways, vehicular, pedestrian, bicycle, those all the different modes of transportation that are connections. And I don't think I'm going to express this well, but I'm thinking of a deeper level of connectivity between downtown Frederick, and there's business connections, and there's community connections, and maybe interpersonal. The connection isn't simply physical, although, and this kind of leads into my third one, but the environment, the physical environment reinforces an opportunity for connection. So for example, East Street is a great connector. And I, as people who know me well, I walk nearly everywhere, and East Street freaks me out. So it is technically a good connector, but as a pedestrian, it's terrible. So that physical streetscape doesn't reinforce the connection. So it's beyond there simply being a path. There's something about the physical design of the path, which is kind of my third goal, is that there needs to be a clear sense of place. That sense of place shouldn't be a replica of someplace else. It should be unique to its own. Downtown Frederick, as an example, has a clear character, but nobody can replicate that. And so
Right.
this place should have a clear character too, that's really strong and powerful, but reflects what's possible in a modern setting. So hopefully that made sense. Sorry, I didn't write it down clearly.
Amen to that. Well, you're being recorded, so we got it. That's those are great points. I love this idea of organizational connections across downtown Frederick and the South Frederick corridor, like some kind of business partnership or something that meshes it together, not just physically, but like in terms of organizational connections. So that's a cool idea.
So,
Yeah, and I'm really hoping that businesses can help each other grow. Like it suffers as I'm not saying that's it's always a possibility. I don't think that's a foregone conclusion. I could see both corridors being really successful and mutually supportive of each other and making the whole greater for the whole county.
Yeah, I just want to reinforce something Cara said, that because when we talk about safety, people a lot of times jump to crime, but safety is also pedestrian safety, and if we're having walkable communities, I think that's a big, issue, especially for kids and for any kind of schools or childcare or health clinics or, around those areas, we should be making sure that the accessibility is safe. Because in a lot of communities, that is not the case, and, all kinds of issues that surround it.
Kelly and I have been working on this issue for a while with regard to pedestrian safety in the city of Frederick. And there are some places that we think are very walkable, but from a perspective of the resident that nearby, they don't think it's necessarily safe. North Frederick Elementary School being one example, where if there was some way to go ahead and encourage people to walk to the neighborhood, it would be really ideal because it would cut down on car traffic that goes to the school and everything. But it's a very challenging situation. Kelly, did you want to add to that?
No, I actually was going to go back to Kara's point and talk, but yes, yes, we're doing a lot of things. We're trying to do a lot of things with that. But to Kara's point about downtown Frederick and the city of Frederick and this corridor both being successful, being complementary, and I voiced at the very first meeting, I'm a city elected official. I believe development really should happen in corporate borders. This area has already developed, and so it's important that it redevelop, but that it become a complementary and not competitive area. So we want both to thrive without the detriment of the other.
Rick Weldon will speak to this a little bit, but you were talking about connection or business connection, and one of the things that it's started, but I won't say it's completely gelled, and that's within the bioscience community. They do host a monthly or quarterly meeting where all the scientists and life science professionals can all come together, and it's a wonderful forum because it's a great way to go ahead and network and meet other life science professionals in the area. And it's modeled on other organizations like the Bio Organization and Organization in Montgomery County. But I think there's an opportunity here to maybe create like a center of excellence for biosciences, or like a campus or a place where life science or for that matter, technology-based workers can come to a campus and get to meet each other and make it easy for them to do it. Because for us, that interaction, that collaboration is really key to our way we develop innovative product. It's that interaction with other like-minded scientists and researchers and engineers that helps us to really make that area flourish. So it's something to put out there, something to think about, whether there's some value here in South Frederick corridor to maybe build upon that particular concept.
Yeah, I also thought very strongly in terms of connection to downtown city of Frederick from this area. I think the business types and opportunities have a great contrast, but what we need to think about is in terms of additional residential, whether people from either side can get to the different types of businesses on the other very easily, whether for working or for shopping. because you're not going to have a Target downtown Frederick, and you're not going to have the kinds of bars and restaurants as much on the south side. So I think we need to think about how we transition people between each so that they mutually support one another.
Great points, everybody. Seriously, it's been a very productive discussion. Anybody else want to chime in with anything? No? All right. Well, we don't have to go the full 2 hours. I feel like this was very productive.
Sorry,
please.
John.
Oh, yeah.
I'm kind of like Kelly. I'm technically challenged sometimes. So I did want to add one thing, and I think everybody's made really, really good points. And I think it was said, but my bullet point was really specific, and that is the goal of the South Frederick Corridor Plan for future development to make sure that it's balanced between commercial employment and residential sectors. That was one of the things that I brought up last week, John, and that is what is that balance between the residential and commercial employment development such that we could get that. And I did try to find some research or do a little bit of research to see if there is some kind of benchmark or percentage out there that we could strive for. But I think it's important for all of us to remember that if we're too heavy on the residential side, it kind of gets out of whack. So I'll continue to do the research and I'll come up with something and share with the group.
Thank you, Carl. That's great. That'd be good information.
Yeah.
I wonder too, like as we think that through, how much the notion of form-based codes could mitigate the need to have a mix or at least a kind of proportional approach in certain areas. If the use designations are more flexible, but the form requirements kind of are more restrictive, then there may be opportunities to allow fluctuations in the market to occur, as they occur, but have those happen within a context that still maintains a physical environment that is walkable and so on and so forth. So that's just a question I have: is how much do form-based codes and less emphasis on land use, although there still is a land use element to there, how much does that influence the idea that there needs to be kind of a balance of various uses? In some areas of the site, I think that's a very important consideration. In others, I'm not sure in my mind yet, how that would play out.
Now, that's a good point. Actually, that's a good segue into my second bullet point that basically says the development needs to provide economic prosperity over the peaks and valleys of economic times. So I agree with that. I think if you can find, again, that balance that speaks to the economic times, I think that's spot on. Yeah.
I would also add to this that we should be looking at trends related to brick and mortar versus virtual, right? Because I think coming out of this pandemic, more commerce, a greater percentage of commerce is going to become virtual. And I just think there's also going to be a lot more, not just telework, but home-based business. And, there's even platforms to help people do that. So I think we really need to think toward the future of what that balance looks like as well. I think these are looking at quadrants as opposed to just one, commercial versus residential. I think it's also within business, what's virtual, what's brick and mortar, what are the other trends out there?
Faith, and I think you bring a very good point up, and that's why challenged John when he looked at that graphic that shows the different sectors. You know, that was pre-COVID. Now that we're beyond COVID, what changes or influences impact those sectors? So, good point.
I think there's a finer point to be made on that, and that's really the only goal I had in mind. When we talk about residential versus non-residential, I just have one specific goal, because I think it was brought up even in our first meeting, to plan for fulfillment and distribution centers that can quickly locate in the area to timely meet market demand with minimal regulatory process. I mean, this is what we're hearing out there, and I think it speaks to what Faith just said. I mean, when we talk about non-residential and employment uses, what is it are we talking about exactly?
Brian, you're on mute, Brian.
Is that better? Can you hear me?
Yeah. He gets that from his dad.
Sorry, I thought I was doing it through my phone. To your point about the form-based zoning and kind of trying to be flexible with the land uses, I think it's important too to, for people to know, especially as, we've gone through COVID and everything, that, maybe the initial development of a site, whether it's a redevelopment or a greenfield development, may not be the dream that everybody wants, but it needs to be flexible enough that it might be the second or third or fourth iteration of that development that is the dream development, and that having, temporary uses, so to speak, during that time, just to kind of spur things and get things going, I think is important, just to, create that activity along the corridor, because again, it might be that second or third iteration that's the ultimate goal that everybody's looking for, but the flexibility needs to be there to, have something occur, just so we can, kind of push things along and, make this corridor what we want it to be.
Yeah, that's another great point. I would just add to that, as long as kind of what happens doesn't preclude the future iterations or doesn't create obstacles for the future iterations, like we need to think in terms of phases in some cases. It reminds me of this phenomenon called the taxpayer block in Boston, in Cambridge, actually, outside of Boston, along Massachusetts Avenue. You get a lot of these buildings that are one level, and they kind of continue along Massachusetts Avenue. And they were developed as these things that were referred to as taxpayer blocks. And the idea was that, I'm just going to build something here in the time being to respond to a current market demand, and it will help me kind of pay the taxes on the site. So it'll be kind of a low one-story building. And in the future, we'll look towards kind of developing it at higher. And the problem with that was a lot of those just kind of stayed taxpayer blocks. Like in the long term, a lot of those just didn't kind of see their next iteration, at least haven't yet seen their next iteration. They've been there for decades and decades and decades. So, I certainly understand this notion of kind of phase development and thinking about how you can implement things over time. But I would also, suggest we need to try to keep our eye on the end goal, which is, and sort of figure out how we can achieve that end goal in the context of all these kind of current forces that want to steer us off course,
Yeah, and that's why I'm not sure form-based does that. Maybe someone can explain to me how it does, but I see this planning has a kind of vision that targets areas and says, here's what we'd like to see happen. And when you do that and give the right zoning and mix of uses, you almost force it in the long run, because what happens is that the land value that increases in terms of investment potential, forcing more of the design that you're looking for. Businesses, low profile, a lot of land wasted. They don't mind moving if suddenly their property is worth 4 times as much to do something different, because they can find that somewhere else just as easy. So to me, we provide a vision, and then we put the tools in place so that someone wants to build that vision.
Yeah, I'm not sure. How to respond. The form-based idea is that whatever development does happen, regardless of the type of use, starts to build up the amenities for public space and public infrastructure so that it creates a certain type of physical environment. With our current zoning, essentially, you have this envelope, and within that envelope, really, anything can happen. Like you can have a parking lot in the front, you can have a low building. Like the design requirements relative to our current zoning are very limited, and so the form-based kind of emphasizes the design aspects more than the use aspects. So what you can kind of gain in terms of use, you have to kind of make up for in terms of design. I guess maybe the suggestion is that we kind of leave it up to future waves of market-based influences, and that those market-based influences will, with the invisible hand, create the type of physical environment that we want. But there's kind of no guarantee to that. Like right now, our zoning basically looks at an individual parcel, and the notion that you need to look at your design relative to your neighboring parcels is very minimal. There's no kind of element that provides this need for consistency or having a structure of infrastructure that goes across multiple parcels. It goes straight from, say, the subdivision of an individual property to a site plan, but there isn't really much of an element that looks at sort of design across multiple areas to create sort of this cohesive district. And form-based codes are kind of the thing that can help do that.
It should be noted as well that form-based codes wouldn't be necessarily useful in all areas. I mean, I think they have, I think they're shown to be most effective in certain types and kinds of developed areas, but I don't think this is necessarily something that we're going to be considering kind of across the board. I think we are always going to have kind of many tools in the toolbox, and this is just another one that we can think about. One way in which form-based code can acknowledge and be adaptable to that kind of tiered development over time is by simply identifying what the end goal is and allowing for kind of interim movement that maybe adapts to some of the most important aspects of the physical environment. But I think the biggest issue for us as planners is that many times we have an idea of what we're looking for, and we try to craft codes to get us to that point, and we end up getting an application from an applicant who also has their vision for their site, and then we spend the next 6 months, 9 months, 2 months, it depends on the complexity, trying to whittle something out, and very often we end up with compromises on both sides. And in some cases that's a victory for everybody, but in a lot of cases it's not. It ends up kind of being a loss across the board for a neighborhood or for a community. So at the very least, the one thing that form-based coding can do is be very clear about what it is the community is looking for at the outset, rather than having folks like in our development review office or folks like John and myself kind of sitting there and trying to kind of use the details to try to form the image of the eventual goal of a particular corridor or an area. So, and everything in between. And I wouldn't get too hung up on the name form-based codes, because there are a lot of iterations of this that could get us to the same place. I think at the very least, just looking at performance zoning, something that is much more kind of tunable, I guess, to situations where you don't necessarily have kind of a mixed use urban environment. We can certainly look at that as well, either with form-based codes, which are a form of performance zoning, or instead of, or in concert with. So, I mean, I definitely see the advantage to being able to acknowledge a multi-generational approach to an ultimate kind of vision for an area. But that's kind of what we have now. The only difference is we don't have a vision guiding us. We're getting plenty of kind of tiered development right over time as land becomes valuable and certain uses kind of fall away and other uses become more important. We're getting that. We're just trying to get a handle on it and trying to wrangle some of that energy so that we can get ourselves to kind of what it is that we're looking at in terms of a vision for the area.
I just wanted to throw this out, and I myself don't know where I land on this issue, so I'm not trying to advance it as my own vision for this. But we've as a group never talked about innovation. Do we want to, should this corridor have some kind of vision of technology innovation? Do we support incubators in this space? You know, is that, a potential? I think we should just throw it out there and then decide it is or it isn't. But, as we have this discussion of what's the vision for business in this area, because there are certain amenities that also attract, corporations or whatever to decide to locate into an area. And so are we planning an area where we want to provide the kinds of amenities that attract these kinds of groups, or is that just not where we're going? I think it's just worth coming down on that one way or another.
Good points, all. Does anyone else have anything they want to share? I'm giving time for people to find the mute button. Danny.
My comment in thinking of this is always, I look at it with a little different perspective. I know the future and the vision, but a lot of my thought is also, it's one of the largest existing concentrations of LI land, to making sure that we pay appropriate attention to those of us that have made a significant investment already predicated on the zoning and what exists in that corridor, making sure that changes and things aren't made that damage the existing infrastructure and the existing businesses. Just always hesitant that if we move forward and we do things that adapt and allow flexibility, that there's an appropriate process. Otherwise, you potentially hurt the existing corridor more than you do with the vision. So there's just the analysis approach for us. We're just ever vigilant. To Noel's comment, the availability of space for distribution. We have some of that readily available for the market. We could always use more, but if flexibility is provided to let in abundance more, you immediately take away from somebody who potentially is buy right that is ready to deliver it. So just sort of the ever cautionary tale. I don't know which fairy tale that relates to. I can't remember. My father wasn't a great storyteller, only when he testifies for legal proceedings. But other than that,
I would say that, this is all about opportunity, and it's not about like the opposite of opportunity. What would that be? So like the way I would think we would try to structure this plan is to offer options and the ability to make changes if those changes make sense to individual property owners, and not to kind of hamstring the existing functioning. Like that's one of the reasons why I showed that graphic about the kind of long-term process, is that we see this as almost kind of a generational plan in some respects, not to be too melodramatic about it, but it's a long-term plan. And, we don't expect uses that are economically, viable, needed to just kind of decommission because, this plan happened. That's not my intent, at least for this plan. But we also see a lot of opportunity for areas of this site to transition into something new and different. So it's going to be a different approach for different areas, but we are aware of that issue.
Well, I just want to say I've lived in a number of communities in transition. So I've definitely seen areas that had certain businesses certain neighborhood feels, and then, redevelopment comes in and it pushes out. The reality is oftentimes it does push out, because land pricing goes up and values go up, and the smaller family-owned businesses are not able to, continue unless some economic, benefit is given to them by the community that allows them to continue to operate. So I whether it's intended or not, it is a consequence of the kinds of things we're looking at here. And I think it's also a question of how quickly versus how much of a slower approach you want to take toward those kinds of transitions. But I've seen it happen time and time again in different places. So it's going to happen. The question is, how do you see it happening, over what time period? And, are there areas where you slow redevelopment because you do want to keep the integrity of that part of the corridor?
I'll just jump in from experience with the East Frederick Rising and Golden Mile small area plans, that it's going to be really important for you to include the stakeholders that are the existing business, that are the old, in this process, and help them to understand we're not trying to push you out. We're trying to support you while also improving this area, because without them, you're not going to succeed.
I have kind of a funny story about that too. Is years and years ago, Jim Google was working on a plan for this area, and on the plan was the notion of extending Guilford Drive through to Maryland 355. And that would have gone right through the current location of the Common Market. And so the owners of the Common Market, were very distressed at this plan, because they thought that, well, the county is going to come in, eminent domain, take our property, close our business down. But now Common Market, has two locations, one in Safeway, one across the street, and that current place is I don't know what it is now. And so the notion of, I guess what I'm trying to say is that it's a long process, and being able to communicate that, like you're saying, is very important.
Also, this whole conversation also brings up the fact that we can't look at any of this in a bubble, that the county absolutely has to be thinking about displacement, or at least potential for that, and think about what's plan B and plan C. Where does somebody go when their small plumbing distribution business can no longer afford the rent, or the property value has reached a point at which it's kind of ridiculous to stay there. We can't look at this in a bubble. We have to make sure that we are thinking 2 or 3 moves ahead. I wouldn't call it chess, but maybe 3-tiered checkers. I don't know. Some level of complexity beyond what we've normally done.
One thing I wanted to go ahead and ask about, because I'm not sure how this has been done in the past, but as this area starts to grow and expand, obviously our old communities that are within this area, and how engaged or disengaged they become in the process. I'm not sure how it's been handled in the past. So one example is the small little town off of Lime Kiln Road. They've been there for a long time, and it's obviously run down, and because the industry had changed. To what degree do we reach out and engage them as part of this visioning process to see how they could, benefit from it, or do they get looked over because nobody in the community wants to take the time to go ahead and get engaged? And so, to what degree do we include these old-time residential community as part of this visioning process to help them see that they could benefit, like you said, the long-range plan? Or are there other plans that maybe we should be thinking about for those communities?
I guess we're nearing the. Did someone else have something, or? I guess since we're nearing the end here, I was just going to go ahead and check public input to see if we have any callers who wanted to comment. And it looks like we do not have anybody in the queue. So with that, unless anybody has anything else, one thing I'd like to request for everybody, if possible, I mean, we do have this meeting recorded, and I will go back and review what people have contributed. But for anyone who has already drafted up something related to a goal, please forward that to me. We're gonna, compile all this and try to structure it into the document. I would appreciate it if you could send that to me. I'll also send out the chart that about the health care process, or I'm trying to remember what it was, but I'll also send that out to the group. So beyond that, thank you, everybody. This was a great meeting. I felt it was a very productive meeting, and at the next meeting, we'll likely have a case study, and I'll send out an agenda with a little bit more detail about what we're planning on doing. So thank you for the time, and I appreciate all of your thoughts and input.
Thank you.
Bye, guys.
Do you want to do a quick meeting, you, me, and Dennis?
Yeah, let's
Okay.
do that.
Okay.
Let's see if we can get Dennis back on.
Or we can do it separately if you want.
Oh, okay. Do you want to send out a
Yeah.
meeting invitation? Okay, cool.